It began like any quiet Friday night, families settling in, kids finishing homework, the hum of television sets drifting through open windows. Just another spring evening in eastern Kentucky. But at 10:27 p.m. on May 16th, 2025, everything changed. A tornado touched down in Russell County, and by midnight, a subdivision in London was unrecognizable. Entire streets gone. Homes that had stood for generations, reduced to splinters and memories. How did one storm wipe out entire neighborhoods, kill nearly 24 people, and carve a mile-wide scar through the Daniel Boone National Forest? Tonight, we trace the deadliest tornado of the year, from birth to devastation, and we uncover the moment when everything went wrong. This is the story of the Somerset-London EF4. Let me take you back. May 16th, 2025, Southern Kentucky, Russell County, Pulaski County, Laurel County, 3 communities woven together by winding roads, dense forests, and generations of families who had built their lives in these hills. People were settling in for the night, dinner dishes cleaned, porch lights flickering on. In Somerset, a couple was watching the late news. In London, kids were getting ready for bed. At the cinema on the south side of Somerset, about 100 people were watching a movie, laughing, completely unaware. It was normal, beautifully, perfectly normal. But 60 miles to the west, something was brewing, something that meteorologists had been watching all day with growing concern. A storm system, powerful and unstable, was pushing east across Kentucky, and the atmospheric conditions. They were perfect. Perfect for disaster. Now, let me explain what was happening in the sky that night, because this wasn't random. This wasn't just bad luck. Meteorologists had issued severe weather warnings earlier that day. The ingredients were all there. ML Cape values, that's the measure of atmospheric instability, were above 2,500 joules per kilogram. To put that in perspective, anything above 1,500 is considered extremely unstable. Wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height, was over 50 knots. That's the kind of shear that can take a thunderstorm and twist it into a rotating monster. Moisture was streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico. Warm, humid air colliding with a cold front. And the jet stream, perfectly positioned to provide that upper-level support that supercells need to sustain themselves for hours. Storm chasers were already on the roads. Radar screens were lighting up. The National Weather Service had highlighted eastern Kentucky as a moderate risk area for severe weather, including tornadoes. But here's the thing about tornadoes. You can have all the right ingredients, all the warnings in the world, and people still think, it won't happen here, not to us. That's what makes them so deadly. 10:27 p.m., the supercell, which had been tracking across central Kentucky for over an hour, finally unleashed its fury. Near Kentucky Route 619 in eastern Russell County, northeast of Jamestown, the first funnel touched down. Witnesses reported a roar, like a freight train, that seemed to come from nowhere. An outbuilding lost its roof. Trees began to snap. First damage mark. At that moment, most people in the area had no idea what was coming. The tornado was rain-wrapped, hidden inside the storm, invisible in the darkness. No lightning to illuminate it, just sound. That terrible, unmistakable roar. Within minutes, the tornado began to intensify. It moved east-northeast, chewing through farmland, ripping through mobile homes like they were made of paper. Hardwood trees, oaks and maples that had stood for 50, 60 years, snapped like twigs. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the hills. By the time it crossed into Pulaski County, near the communities of Whittle and Gosser Ridge, it had already reached EF2 intensity. Winds over 130 miles per hour. Debris was being lofted thousands of feet into the air, and it was still growing. Now, here's where things get really terrifying. As the tornado moved into Pulaski County, it began to widen. The funnel, which had started maybe 200 yards across, was expanding. 300 yards, 400. The rotation was tightening. The winds accelerating. Mobile homes were rolled and destroyed. Entire roofs peeled off houses and thrown hundreds of feet. Trees weren't just snapped anymore. They were being uprooted, root balls the size of cars ripped straight out of the ground. Emergency dispatchers were being flooded with calls, people screaming into their phones. "It's here! It's here!" Power lines were coming down, transformers exploding in bright flashes of blue and white. And then, the tornado entered Somerset, Kentucky, a town of about 11,000 people. Quiet, historic, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. The southern edge of town took the first hit. Homes were damaged, some destroyed. A church lost its front wall. Businesses along the main strip had their roofs torn off. And at the cinema, where about 100 people were watching a movie, the power suddenly cut out. Darkness, silence, and then that roar. The manager rushed everyone into the interior hallways. No windows, get down. People were crying, praying, holding their children. Outside, the tornado was passing within a quarter mile of the building. They had no idea how close they came. But here's the thing. Somerset was just the beginning. The tornado was about to enter the Daniel Boone National Forest. And what happened next would push it to a level of intensity that few tornadoes ever reach. What was coming next in those woods? That's the question that still haunts meteorologists today. The Daniel Boone National Forest. 700,000 acres of dense woodland, steep ridges, and isolated hollows. Beautiful. Remote. And on the night of May 16th, it became a war zone. As the tornado moved east of Somerset, into the forest along Poplarville Road, it underwent what meteorologists call rapid intensification, the kind of explosive strengthening that turns a dangerous tornado into a catastrophic one. The path width expanded to nearly a mile, 1,700 yards across. Winds reached 170 miles per hour, EF4. Trees weren't just snapped, they were debarked, stripped completely of their bark, left standing like white skeletal fingers pointing at the sky. The ground was scoured, vegetation ripped away down to the soil. And then, the homes. There was a one-story house along Poplarville Road. A family lived there. They'd been there for years. When the tornado hit, that house was completely leveled, not damaged, not destroyed, leveled. The foundation was swept clean. Walls, roof, furniture, everything. Scattered across the forest in a debris field that stretched for miles. Investigators later found pieces of that house over 10 miles away. This is what EF4 damage looks like. This is the kind of force that can drive a piece of straw through a wooden beam. That can turn a family photo into a missile. That can erase a home from existence in seconds. And the tornado? It wasn't done. By 11:30 p.m., the tornado was at peak intensity, nearly a mile wide, winds around 170 miles per hour, moving at 40 miles per hour across the landscape. Do the math on that. If you're in its path, you have minutes to take cover, maybe less. The roar could be heard for miles. People in communities that weren't even in the direct path reported hearing it. A deep, rumbling thunder that didn't stop, didn't fade, just kept coming. Debris was being lofted into the mesocyclone, the rotating updraft at the heart of the supercell, and carried for miles. Pieces of homes, trees, vehicles, all swirling in a column of destruction that reached thousands of feet into the sky. Radar operators at the National Weather Service office in Jackson, Kentucky, were watching in real time. The velocity couplets on their screens, the signature of rotation, were off the charts. They'd issued tornado warnings, but in the middle of the night, in rural Kentucky, how do you reach people? Cell service was spotty, power was out in many areas. Tornado sirens, if they were even installed, were being drowned out by the storm itself. And the tornado was now crossing into Laurel County, heading straight for London, Kentucky, population about 8,000, the county seat of Laurel County, a town with a hospital, schools, a regional airport, a community. And directly in the path was a subdivision called Sunshine Hills. Sunshine Hills. The name feels almost cruel now. It was a neighborhood of modest homes, families, retirees, tree-lined streets, kids' bikes and driveways, the kind of place where people felt safe. At approximately 11:30 p.m., the tornado, still at EF4 intensity, slammed into Sunshine Hills. Entire blocks were swept clean, homes that had been there for decades, gone, foundations exposed, vehicles thrown hundreds of feet, wrapped around trees, flipped upside down, debris everywhere, insulation, shredded wood, twisted metal, family belongings scattered like confetti. The sound was indescribable. Survivors later said it wasn't just a roar, it was a scream. The wind screaming, the houses screaming as they were torn apart, people screaming for their loved ones. And then, silence. The kind of silence that comes after something unthinkable. Ida House lived in Sunshine Hills. When the tornado warnings came through, she and her family did what they'd been taught. They went to the most interior room in the house, the bathroom. They climbed into the bathtub, pulled a mattress over themselves, and held on. She described it later, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "It's bad. We lost everything except some in the house. Not much." The walls around them disintegrated, the roof lifted off and vanished into the night. The windows exploded, but that bathtub, it held, and they survived. When they climbed out, they couldn't recognize their own neighborhood. Homes they'd walked past every day. Gone. The street itself was buried under debris, power lines draped across the road like spider webs. And in the darkness, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning, they could hear others calling out, "Help! Somebody help!" Ida and her family started searching, pulling debris, calling names. They found neighbors trapped under collapsed walls. They found people injured, bleeding, in shock. And they found others who didn't make it, but some lost more than homes. At 11:47 p.m., a security camera at London Corben Airport captured something extraordinary. The tornado, still massive, still violent, crossing directly over the runway. You can see it in the footage. The camera shakes, the lights flicker, and then this massive dark column, barely visible against the night sky, moves across the frame. Hangars in the foreground begin to disintegrate. Metal panels peel away. A medical helicopter, parked on the tarmac, is picked up and thrown. And then, the power cuts out. The camera goes black. When dawn came, the airport was unrecognizable. Hangars destroyed. Aircraft damaged or destroyed. The runway littered with debris. One of the airport's buildings had been reduced to a concrete slab. The tornado had literally torn through a regional airport, and it still wasn't done. By the time the tornado finally began to weaken, east of London, moving toward the community of Leda, it had been on the ground for 89 minutes. 89 minutes of continuous destruction, a path nearly 60 miles long. At its widest, almost a mile across. Peak winds of 170 miles per hour. And the toll? In Laurel County alone, damage was estimated at $350 million. Over 1,500 homes damaged or destroyed, businesses gone, infrastructure shattered. But the numbers that matter most? At least 19 people dead, over 108 injured, 19 lives, 19 families shattered, 19 funerals, names, faces, stories. A grandmother who'd lived in London her whole life. A young couple who'd just bought their first home. A father who'd been trying to get his kids to the basement when the house came down. These weren't statistics. These were people. And here's the thing about night tornadoes. They kill more. Studies show that tornadoes that strike between sunset and sunrise are more than twice as deadly as daytime tornadoes. Why? Because people are asleep. Because you can't see them coming. Because even if you get a warning, you have seconds to wake up, process what's happening, and find shelter. Seconds. That's all the difference between life and death. At 11:56 p.m., the tornado finally lifted. West of Leda, Kentucky, the funnel rope out, the circulation weakening, the winds dropping. The supercell that had spawned it continued east, but the tornado itself was done. But the nightmare was just beginning, because now came the darkness, the real darkness. Power out across the entire region. No streetlights, no house lights, just blackness. And in that blackness, people were trapped, injured, dying. Emergency responders were trying to get in, but roads were blocked. Trees down, power lines down. Debris piled 6, 8, 10 feet high in some places. Fire trucks couldn't get through. Ambulances were stuck, and there were fires. Gas lines had ruptured. Sparks from downed power lines were igniting debris. In the middle of a disaster zone, in the pitch dark, fires were breaking out. First responders were doing everything they could, but it wasn't enough. There weren't enough of them. There wasn't enough equipment, and the scale of the destruction was just overwhelming. So neighbors started helping neighbors. People with chainsaws started cutting through fallen trees. People with trucks started pulling debris off the roads. Survivors, people who just lost everything, were digging through rubble to find others. That's what happens in moments like this. When everything falls apart, people come together. When the sun finally rose on May 17th, the community saw the full scope of the devastation. Aerial footage showed a scar cut through the landscape, a brown, barren path where the tornado had stripped everything away. Neighborhoods that had been green and tree-lined were now just rubble. Foundations, debris fields. In Sunshine Hills, people walked through what used to be their streets, trying to find anything. A photo, a piece of jewelry, a child's toy. Anything that connected them to the life they had had just hours before. Some found nothing. The Daniel Boone National Forest looked like a bomb had gone off. Thousands of acres of trees down, all pointing in the same direction, east-northeast, following the path of the tornado. The Forest Service estimated it would take years for the forest to recover. Some areas might never look the same. And in the middle of all this, people were still searching, still calling out names, still hoping. But here's where the story shifts, because within hours, help started arriving. The Salvation Army rolled in with mobile kitchens, hot meals, coffee, a place to sit down and just breathe. FEMA deployed teams, Operation Barbecue Relief, a nonprofit that responds to disasters, set up and started serving thousands of meals a day. The Red Cross opened shelters, churches opened their doors, schools became distribution centers for water, food, clothing, supplies, and volunteers, oh my God, the volunteers. People drove in from Tennessee, from Ohio, from Indiana, strangers showing up with chainsaws, work gloves, and a willingness to help. No questions asked, just, what do you need? Where do I start? Neighbors became rescuers. Communities became families. One woman described it like this: we lost everything, our house, our cars, everything. But we didn't lose each other, and we didn't lose hope, because people we'd never met showed up and said, we're here. We're going to help you rebuild. That's the other side of disaster. Yes, there's destruction. Yes, there's loss. But there's also humanity, the best of us, the part that shows up when it matters most. But we need to talk about why. Why was this tornado so violent? Why did it last so long? Why did it intensify the way it did? I spoke with meteorologists, and here's what they told me. First, the atmospheric setup was extreme. ML Cape values above 2,500 joules per kilogram. That's the fuel. That's the instability that feeds the updraft, that creates the towering supercell. Second, wind shear. Over 50 knots of bulk shear, meaning the winds at the surface and the winds aloft were moving at very different speeds and directions. That creates rotation. That's what turns a thunderstorm into a supercell, and a supercell into a tornado factory. Third, moisture. Deep Gulf moisture, streaming north, providing the humidity that supercells need to sustain themselves for hours. And fourth, the storm's path. This supercell traveled hundreds of miles. It had time to organize, to strengthen, to produce a long-track, violent tornado. But here's the kicker. Even with all those ingredients, most tornadoes don't reach EF4 intensity. Most don't stay on the ground for 89 minutes. Most don't carve a 60-mile path. This one did, and meteorologists are still studying why. What was different? What pushed this tornado over the edge? Because if we can understand that, maybe we can predict it better next time. And that brings us to the uncomfortable questions, the warnings, The National Weather Service issued tornado warnings. They did their job. But here's the problem. It was the middle of the night. Studies show that people are far less likely to respond to warnings at night. They're asleep. They don't hear the alerts. And even if they do, there's a delay. You have to wake up, process what's happening, decide what to do, and ACT. In a fast-moving tornado, that delay can be fatal. Add to that cell service gaps in rural Kentucky, power outages that knocked out weather radios, tornado sirens that either didn't exist in some areas or were drowned out by the storm. And then there's the staffing issue. The National Weather Service office in Jackson, Kentucky, which covers this area, has faced staffing cuts in recent years. Fewer meteorologists on duty, longer hours, more area to cover. Some critics have argued that if there had been more staff, more eyes on the radar, more people issuing warnings and coordinating with local emergency management, maybe more lives could have been saved. We'll never know. But it's a question worth asking. Now, let me tell you about Paul and Gail Klein. They lived in Laurel County, married for decades, the kind of couple that finishes each other's sentences, that still holds hands when they walk. When the tornado warnings came through that night, they did what they'd always been taught. They went to the interior bathroom. They huddled together in the bathtub. They held each other. And then the house exploded around them. The walls disintegrated. The roof vanished. Debris became shrapnel, flying at over 100 miles per hour. And in those seconds, in that chaos, Paul and Gail were hit. When rescuers found them hours later, they were still holding each other. But Paul had lost his right arm. Gail had lost her left. The arms they'd been using to hold each other. Gone. A relative described it later, voice breaking. They were holding each other, both lost arms, but they survived. Think about that for a moment. In the worst moment of their lives, in unimaginable pain, in shock, they didn't let go. They held on to each other. And that's probably why they're still alive. Because in a tornado, in that kind of violence, if you get separated, if you lose your grip, you can be thrown. You can be buried. You can disappear into the debris field and never be found. Paul and Gail are still recovering, months of surgeries, physical therapy, learning to live with prosthetics, learning to do basic tasks all over again. But they're alive. And when asked if they'd rebuild, if they'd stay in Kentucky, they didn't hesitate. This is our home. This is where we belong. That's resilience. That's the human spirit refusing to break, even when everything else does. So, what happens next? How do you rebuild after something like this? In the days and weeks after the tornado, the scale of the challenge became clear. 1,500 homes damaged or destroyed in Laurel County alone. Hundreds more in Pulaski and Russell counties. Infrastructure shattered, roads torn up, water lines broken, power grid decimated, schools damaged, businesses gone. The economic impact? Staggering. $350 million in Laurel County. Add in the other counties and you're looking at well over $500 million in total damage. Insurance companies were overwhelmed. FEMA was processing thousands of applications for disaster assistance. The Small Business Administration was offering low-interest loans to help people rebuild. But here's the thing about disaster recovery. It's slow. Months later, people were still living in temporary housing, FEMA trailers, hotels, staying with relatives. Because you can't just rebuild a house overnight. You need permits, inspections, materials, contractors. And when an entire region is trying to rebuild at the same time, everything gets backed up. Some people decided not to rebuild. The trauma was too much. They took their insurance money and moved away, started over somewhere else. But most stayed. Because this is home. This is where their families are buried, where their kids went to school, where they built their lives. And slowly, the rebuilding began. New homes going up, businesses reopening, the Forest Service planting new trees, memorials being erected for those who died. London, Somerset, the smaller communities along the path, they're coming back. Different, yes. Scarred, absolutely. But coming back. But we need to zoom out for a moment, because this tornado, as devastating as it wasn't alone. The Somerset-London tornado was part of a much larger outbreak. The tornado outbreak of May 15th through 16th, 2025. Over those 2 days, 60 tornadoes touched down across the United States, from Texas to Kentucky to the Carolinas. Multiple EF3s, several EF4s. One outbreak, dozens of tornadoes, widespread destruction. The total damage from that outbreak? Nearly $6 billion. $6 billion. It was one of the costliest tornado outbreaks in U.S. history. And here's what keeps meteorologists up at night. This is becoming more common. Now, I need to be careful here. The science on tornadoes and climate change is still evolving. We can't say definitively that climate change is causing more tornadoes. The data doesn't support that yet. But what we can say is that the environment in which tornadoes form is changing. Warmer temperatures mean more moisture in the atmosphere, more fuel for storms. And there's evidence that tornado outbreaks, when they do happen, are becoming more intense. More tornadoes per outbreak, longer track tornadoes. Tornadoes in places that historically didn't see many. The traditional tornado alley in the Great Plains, still active, but we're seeing a shift eastward. More tornadoes in the southeast. In Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi. And here's the problem with that. The southeast is more vulnerable. Why? Because it's more densely populated, more trees which hide tornadoes, more hills and valleys which disrupt radar coverage, and more night tornadoes because the atmospheric conditions in the southeast favor nocturnal severe weather, all of which makes tornadoes in this region more deadly. The Somerset-London tornado is a perfect example. Night tornado, densely forested area, rural communities with limited warning infrastructure, recipe for disaster. So, are we ready? Are we ready for the next one? Because there will be a next one. That's not pessimism, that's reality. Tornadoes are a fact of life in this part of the country. The question isn't if another major tornado will strike Kentucky, it's when. And what are we doing to prepare? Some things are improving. Weather radar technology is getting better. Dual polarization radar can now detect debris signatures, which helps confirm that a tornado is on the ground and causing damage in real time. Warning lead times are increasing. 30 years ago, the average tornado warning lead time was about 5 minutes. Now, it's closer to 15 minutes. That's progress. But 15 minutes is still not a lot of time, especially at night. There's talk of implementing more sophisticated warning systems, wireless emergency alerts that are more specific, that can target smaller areas, that include more information about the threat. There's talk of building more community safe rooms, reinforced structures where people can shelter during tornadoes, especially in mobile home parks and schools. There's talk of better education, teaching people what to do, where to go, how to recognize the signs of a tornado, even in the dark. But talk is cheap. Implementation costs money. It requires political will. It requires communities to prioritize preparedness over other needs. And in rural areas where budgets are already stretched thin, that's a hard sell. Until the next tornado hits. And then, for a few weeks, everyone cares. Everyone wants to talk about preparedness and warning systems and safe rooms. And then, life goes on. The news cycle moves on. And the urgency fades. Until the next time. Let me take you back to the path one more time. Imagine you're flying over eastern Kentucky in the weeks after the tornado. You're looking down and you can see it. A brown scar cutting through the green landscape, 60 miles long, in some places nearly a mile wide. You can see where it started in Russell County. The damage is lighter there, scattered, trees down, a few buildings damaged. You follow it east and it gets worse. Into Pulaski County. More trees down, mobile homes destroyed, the path widens. Then Somerset. You can see the damaged neighborhoods, the blue tarps on roofs, the debris piles, then the forest. And this is where it's most striking. Thousands upon thousands of trees, all down, all pointing the same direction. A massive swath of destruction cutting through the Daniel Boone National Forest like a knife. Then London, Sunshine Hills. And from the air, you can see the foundations, dozens of them, just empty concrete slabs where homes used to be. The street grid is still there, but the houses are gone. Then the airport, damaged hangars, debris scattered across the runway. And finally, east of London, the path begins to narrow. The damage lessens. And then it ends. 60 miles, 89 minutes, one tornado. But here's what you also see from the air. You see the recovery. You see new construction, frames going up, roofs being installed. You see crews clearing debris. You see the Forest Service planting new seedlings. You see life returning, because that's what humans do. We rebuild, we recover, we refuse to let disaster have the last word. I want to share one more story with you. There's a woman named Sarah, lived in London her whole life, raised her kids there, buried her husband there. Her house was in Sunshine Hills. When the tornado hit, she was home alone. She made it to her interior closet, pulled a mattress over herself, and prayed. The house was destroyed, completely. When she climbed out of the rubble, she couldn't even tell where her bedroom had been. Everything was just gone. She spent that first night in a shelter, couldn't sleep, couldn't process what had happened. She'd lost everything. Photos of her kids, her wedding album, her husband's belongings, 50 years of memories, erased in 90 seconds. She told a reporter a few days later, "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can start over." But then something happened. Volunteers showed up, strangers. They started digging through her debris pile, and they found things. A photo album, water damaged but intact. A jewelry box with her wedding ring. A quilt her grandmother had made. Small things. But to Sarah, everything. And those volunteers, they didn't just find her belongings. They stayed. They helped her navigate the FEMA paperwork. They connected her with contractors. They checked on her every few days. And slowly, Sarah started to believe she could do this. 6 months later, she's rebuilding. Same lot, same neighborhood. Because, as she put it, "This is where I belong. This is where my life is." A tornado doesn't get to take that away from me. That's the story that doesn't always get told. The long, slow, difficult work of rebuilding. Not just houses, but lives. Not just communities, but hope. Now, let's talk about the lessons. What did we learn from the Somerset-London tornado? First, night tornadoes are killers. We need better ways to warn people when they're asleep. Louder alerts, more persistent alerts. Technology that doesn't just beep once and stop. Second, rural communities are vulnerable. They often lack the warning infrastructure that cities have. Fewer sirens, spottier cell coverage, longer response times for emergency services. We need to invest in these communities before disaster strikes, not just after. Third, preparedness saves lives. The people who survived, the ones who made it through with minimal injuries, almost all of them did the same things. They had a plan. They knew where to go. They took the warning seriously. They acted fast. The people who died, many of them were caught off guard, didn't have a plan, didn't have a safe place to shelter, hesitated. In a tornado, hesitation kills. Fourth, community matters. The response in Kentucky, the way neighbors helped neighbors, the way volunteers poured in, that's what made the difference between a disaster and a catastrophe. We need to foster that sense of community before disaster strikes, so it's already there when we need it. And fifth, we need to keep studying these storms. We need to understand what makes a tornado intensify to EF4. We need to understand long-track tornadoes. We need to understand nocturnal tornadoes, because the more we understand, the better we can predict, the better we can warn, and the more lives we can save. Let me show you something. This tornado, the Somerset-London EF4, is now one of only 4 EF4 tornadoes in Kentucky's recorded history. 4. The others? The Mayfield tornado in December 2021, the Louisville tornado in April 1974, and one other from the 1960s. That's how rare these storms are. And that's how significant this event is. This isn't just another tornado. This is a historic event. The kind of storm that gets studied for decades. The kind of storm that changes building codes, that changes warning protocols, that changes how we think about severe weather. And for the people who lived through it, It's the storm that divided their lives into before and after. Before the tornado, life was normal, predictable, safe. After the tornado, nothing is the same. Every thunderstorm brings anxiety. Every weather alert brings fear. Every dark cloud on the horizon brings memories flooding back. That's the invisible damage, the psychological toll, the trauma that doesn't show up in damage estimates or insurance claims. And that's something we need to talk about more. Disaster mental health. PTSD from natural disasters. The long-term emotional impact of losing everything. Because rebuilding a house is one thing, rebuilding a sense of safety, that takes much, much longer. So, where does that leave us? Here we are, months after the Somerset-London tornado. The debris has been cleared, the roads have been repaired, power has been restored, life is returning to something resembling normal. But the scars remain. Drive through Sunshine Hills today, and you'll see new houses going up. But you'll also see empty lots, foundations that haven't been touched, for sale signs. Walk through the Daniel Boone National Forest, and you'll see the path. It'll be visible for years, maybe decades. The forest will regrow, but it'll never look quite the same. Talk to survivors, and you'll hear the resilience, the determination, the hope, but you'll also hear the pain, the loss, the fear that it could happen again. Because it can happen again. Kentucky is in a region where tornadoes are a fact of life. The atmospheric conditions that created the May 16th outbreak, they'll happen again. Maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe 10 years from now, but they'll happen. And when they do, will we be ready? Will we have learned the lessons from Somerset and London? Will we have invested in warning systems, in safe rooms, in preparedness education? Or will we wait until after the next disaster to ask these questions? I want you to imagine something. Imagine it's a Friday night. You're at home, maybe watching TV, maybe getting ready for bed. It's been a normal day, a good day. And then your phone buzzes, tornado warning. Take shelter immediately. What do? Do you know where to go? Do you have a plan? Have you talked to your family about what to do? Or do you hesitate? Do you think, it probably won't hit here? Do you wait to see if it gets worse? Because that hesitation, that's what kills people. The survivors of the Somerset-London tornado, almost all of them will tell you the same thing. We didn't think it would be that bad. We didn't think it would hit us, but it did. And the next tornado won't care if you're prepared or not. It won't care if you have a plan or not. It won't care if you take it seriously or not. It'll just come. So, here's what I want you to do. Right now, today, before you finish watching this video, make a plan. Figure out where the safest place in your home is. Interior room, lowest floor, no windows. Tell your family. Practice it. Get a weather radio. Get a weather app on your phone. Make sure you'll get the warnings. And when a warning comes, take it seriously. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Act. Because someday, that warning might save your life. The Somerset-London tornado killed at least 19 people, injured over 100, destroyed 1,500 homes, caused over $500 million in damage. But it also revealed something beautiful. It revealed the strength of community, the power of human compassion, the resilience of the human spirit. It revealed that even in our darkest moments, even when everything is destroyed, even when hope seems lost, we find a way forward. We find each other. We help each other. We rebuild together. That's the story that needs to be told. Not just the destruction, but the recovery. Not just the loss, but the resilience. Not just the fear, but the hope. Because yes, tornadoes are terrifying. Yes, they're destructive. Yes, they can take everything from you in seconds. But they can't take your humanity. They can't take your compassion. They can't take your determination to rebuild, to recover, to survive. And that's what Kentucky showed us in the aftermath of May 16th. As I close this, I want you to remember the names. The 19 people who died in the Somerset-London tornado weren't just numbers. They were grandmothers and fathers and children and neighbors. They were people with lives and dreams and families who loved them. They deserve to be remembered. And the survivors, the hundreds of people who lost everything but kept going, they deserve to be honored because they're the ones doing the hard work, the daily work of rebuilding, of healing, of refusing to let disaster define them. They're the ones who wake up every morning in a FEMA trailer or a temporary apartment and say, "Today I'm going to take one more step forward." They're the ones who drive past the empty lot where their house used to be and say, "I'm going to rebuild." They're the ones who hear thunder and feel their heart race but don't let the fear win. They are the heroes of this story. The night of May 16th, 2025 will be remembered in Kentucky for generations. It'll be remembered as the night the sky opened up and unleashed one of the most powerful tornadoes in state history. It'll be remembered as the night entire communities were changed forever. It'll be remembered as the night 19 people lost their lives. But it'll also be remembered as the night that showed what humans are capable of when everything falls apart, the courage, the compassion, the resilience, and it'll be remembered as a warning. A warning that tornadoes can strike anywhere, anytime. That night, tornadoes are especially deadly. That preparedness isn't optional, it's essential. The question we're left with isn't just, can it happen again? Of course it can. The question is, will we be ready when it does? Will we have learned the lessons? Will we have made the investments? Will we have taken the warnings seriously? Or will we wait until the next disaster to ask these questions? I'll leave you with this. Somewhere in eastern Kentucky right now, the sun is setting. Families are sitting down to dinner. Kids are doing homework. Life is going on. The forest is slowly regrowing. New homes are being built. The scars are healing. But the memory remains. And on quiet nights, when the wind picks up and the sky darkens, people remember. They remember the roar. They remember the fear. They remember the moment everything changed. And they hold their loved ones a little tighter. Because they know now, in a way they didn't before, how fragile everything is, how quickly it can all be taken away. But they also know how strong they are, how resilient, how capable of surviving the unthinkable. The Somerset-London tornado took a lot from Kentucky, but it didn't take everything. It didn't take hope. The night the Somerset-London tornado struck will be remembered. But will we remember the lessons? The question isn't just if it can happen again. It's when, and when that moment comes, will you be ready? In memory of the 19 killed and 108 injured, May 16th, 2025, Somerset, London, Kentucky.